Good morning, everybody. I want to welcome the members to our October DASNY meeting, the Halloween meeting. We have a lot to cover during this session, so we'll get started. First of all, a very foreign welcome to you.
Thank you.
Your first time at the table in your new official capacity. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much.
I won't spend all the time reading what Gerard gave me to read about you. But I will simply say that your reputation precedes itself in your new job, and your time with DASNY has been, by all accounts, outstanding. We'll be working with you.
Thank you very much.
Let me say to Caroline Griffin, who is also a part of this team, you've already been extraordinarily helpful to many of us around this table. We look forward to continuing to work with you in what is, in essence, a changed capacity. Thank you very much. I want to mention, before we get going, Joseph Gilchrist, who represents the Division of Ed, has informed me this morning, Division of Education, has informed me this morning that he has taken a new position and will be leaving the table at some point. Well, this will be your last meeting.
Correct, yes. I've accepted a position working for the Division of the Budget, so this will be my last meeting as a designated representative of Commissioner Beth Berlin. Thank you all for having me. It's certainly been an honor and a pleasure serving with you guys, and thank you for all of you guys, and for always being there to answer any questions that I may have. I'm joined here with Brian Czechnicki, who is the Finance Director at State Education Department. He'll be taking my place as a designated representative from SED.
Joe, thank you very much for your service here. You've been very participatory, and I've been very pleased with that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've also been there to answer questions for me when we have spoken offline. Thank you very much for that. Brian, thank you for stepping into the spot. Looking forward to working with you.
I hope to follow his lead, so.
You certainly will.
Thank you. We're going to have two executive sessions today. The first very early in the meeting, the second much later in the meeting. The first one will be very short. We did not want to keep all of our guests in this meeting all day long, so we thought we'd do the longer session later on. You may send money if you'd like. So let's get into it. The first agenda item, minutes of the September 11th board meeting. Have you all had a chance to review the minutes? Are there any questions? Suggested provisions? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to include those minutes? Gerard, thank you. Is there a second? John Johnson, thank you very much. All in favor, please indicate with aye.
Aye.
As there are none opposed, the minutes pass. The minutes are accepted. We're now going to go into the executive session. May I have a motion to go into the executive session to discuss the financial and credit histories of particular corporations, proposed, pending, or current litigation, and the employment history of particular persons or matters leading to the appointment, employment, promotion, demotion, discipline, suspension, dismissal, or removal of particular persons.
Motion.
Joan, thank you. Is there a second? Thank you, Tracy. All in favor, please indicate with aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries unanimously. We are in executive session. The record will indicate that the board just completed a closed session during which no decisions were made other than to return to public session. Our next agenda item is the Finance Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We met yesterday afternoon in Albany. After approving the meeting minutes from the September 10th meeting of the Finance Committee, we advanced and discussed 5 resolutions. One was the PIT sales tax bond. The other was the St. Mary's Hospital for Children. The other was the SUNY facilities bond. And there was the convent of the Sacred Heart. Then we also discussed a TELP financing for Montefiore. After some discussions on each and every one of those issues, the Finance Committee recommends that they be adopted at today's board meeting. And unless anyone has any questions, which I'd be more than happy to answer, that concludes my report, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Any questions for the Finance Committee Chair? Thank you. Or no?
Yeah.
Okay.
The Finance Committee also discussed an amendment to the Board Financing Authorization Policy. This is really, it's a discussion item, something that we'd also like to raise to the board, also for your consideration as a discussion item. No action is being requested. As you know, the Board Financing Authorization Policy sets forth, among other things, the finances which qualify for single approval authorization by the board. It lists out the various transactions which qualify, one category of which is private client financings for highly rated higher education and healthcare institutions. What this amendment does is it would allow the borrowers, the private clients who are eligible for single approval to be highly rated higher education or healthcare institutions or an authorized affiliate of those institutions. What we're seeking to do here is to recognize that there's a provision of the MICFA statute, which allows various not-for-profit corporations to also get the benefit of our financing on their behalf. So, it's something that we would like to, discuss over time with the board, and just wanted to bring this to your attention as something that we will be coming back to at some point in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Portia, thank you very much. We're going to move on to the single approval financings. There are three of them. First is behind tab 3. It is the personal income tax, sales tax revenue bond program. With co-bond counsel Lori Hall, with whom I had a delightful conversation in the elevator this morning, from Hawkins Delafield, and Robert James, of Golden Holly James, with whom I had a very good conversation at the hotel this morning. and with our own Matthew Bergen presenting.
Thank you and good morning, everyone. The board is being asked to authorize the issuance of multiple series of tax-exempt and/or taxable bonds, which may be issued as fixed and/or variable rate bonds, issued at one or more times with a term of 30 years and an amount not to exceed $3.5 billion. We're seeking the authorization under either the sales tax revenue bond program and/or the personal income tax revenue bond program. The mechanics of the two programs are very similar. The major difference is the stream of revenues that secures the bonds, sales tax revenue as opposed to personal income tax revenue. The bonds are being issued for new money and refunding purposes, and the new money portion will be for authorized purposes, including capital projects for CUNY, capital projects for OMH, OPWDD, and OASIS, transportation initiatives for the New York Works transportation infrastructure projects, capital projects for SUNY. We will also look to fund various environmental initiatives, fund the state and municipal facilities grants, otherwise known as the SAM grants. They'll also be looking to fund various healthcare grants and fund various education programs. In addition, the authorization is also for the refunding of certain bonds issued under various state debt-supported programs in the amount of $1.5 billion. And I wanted to go into that $1.5 billion. The majority of it is looked at as a taxable advance refunding of approximately $1.4 billion. And there is only approximately $100 million that would be a current refunding that would be done on a tax-exempt basis. For the security provisions, if the bonds are issued under the sales tax revenue bond program, bonds will be paid by the semi-annual payments made pursuant to a financing agreement between DASNY and the state. And also the security provisions for the sales tax program include the set aside of 1 cent or approximately 25% of the state's 4% sales tax to be collected pursuant to statute and deposited in the sales tax revenue bond fund. The debt service coverage that is reported for the sales tax bonds is 3.3 times. If the bonds are issued under the personal income tax revenue bond program, bonds again will be paid by the semi-annual payments made pursuant to the financing agreement between DASNY and the state. and the bonds are secured by a set aside of 50% of personal income tax revenues collected pursuant to statute and 50% of the receipts of the employer compensation expense tax, with both taxes deposited in the revenue bond tax fund. The debt service coverage that is reported for the personal income tax bonds is 6.4 times. And to conclude, both programs are expected to be rated AA1, AA+, and AA+.
Well, as usual, Matt's done a very thorough job of describing not only the financial structure, but a good part of the legal structure. So I'm going to try not to be too repetitive here and stick to just the salient points. Some of it will be repetitive, however. Before you this morning are two supplemental resolutions for your consideration. The first being under the PIP program, pursuant to the PIP General Purpose Bond Resolution that was adopted in 2009. And the second being under for sales tax program pursuant to the sales tax general bond resolution adopted in 2013. Each of the supplemental resolutions, as Matt said, authorizes the issuance of multiple series of bonds to be issued at one or more times in an aggregate principal amount not to exceed $3.5 billion. While each supplemental resolution separately authorizes $3.5 billion of bonds, each also expressly provides that the issuance of bonds under one will not only reduce the remaining authorization under that resolution, but will automatically, without further action of the board, reduce the authorization under the other supplemental resolution. This means the total combined amount of bonds that the board would be authorizing today is effectively limited to $3.5 billion total. And this gives maximum flexibility to DASNY and the Division of Budget to issue either one or both of the resolutions they have in the past. Split it up. I don't know that that's being considered this time, but it gives them maximum flexibility. Each of the supplemental resolutions provides that the bonds may be issued for any authorized purposes, which is defined by statute for each of the programs as any purpose for which state-supported debt may be issued. As noted earlier, the bonds are being authorized today are expected to be issued for both new money and refunding purposes. Matt laid out the expected application of the new money portion, so I won't recite the various programs again, but want to confirm that his summary matches what's in the resolutions before you today. The bonds that may be refunded include any state-supported bonds issued by DASNY or other authorized issuers. Because the ability to advance refunds was eliminated by Congress for on tax-exempt purposes, any bonds that are issued to refund bonds on a tax-exempt basis would necessarily be a current refunding. You can only advance refund on a taxable basis. And by saying a current refunding, that simply means the bonds to be refunded are callable, and they would be redeemed within 90 days of the date of issuance. The sales tax program was adapted from the PIP bond program, which has been in place for a long time now, and the two programs operate very similarly, as Matt pointed out, with the primary difference being the source of revenues available to pay debt service. Because both programs are intended to be very similar, one having been modeled after the other, the statutory framework as well as the governing bond documents are also very similar, almost identical. Under the PIT structure, 50% of the estimated monthly personal income tax receipts and 50% of the estimated monthly receipts from the employer compensation expense program, that being the more recently created payroll tax program, are statutorily required to be deposited in the revenue bond tax fund, a fund that's held separate by the state. The money in the revenue bond tax fund is used to pay debt service on all PIT bonds, not just DASNY's, but any authorized issuer, in each case subject to appropriation. Similarly, under the state sales program, currently 1 cent of the 4-cent sales and compensating use tax is set aside in a separate fund held by the state, being the sales tax revenue bond tax fund. And again, that's used to pay debt service on all sales tax bonds subject to appropriation. With respect to each bond program, the obligation of the state to pay debt service on DASNY's bonds, as well as the mechanics of making sure that sufficient funds will flow through the respective resolutions at the appropriate times, is provided for in separate financing agreements entered into by DASNY and the Division of Budget. It is the debt service payments made by the state under these financing agreements, together with amounts in the funds and accounts held by the trustees under the respective resolutions, that are pledged as security for the respective bonds. Not only are the general resolutions and the financing agreements very much alike, so too are the supplemental resolutions before you today, which Robert's going to discuss in more detail.
So I suffer the indignity of following two great performers. Very little left to say that would be of use to you, but forgive me for having to read some of this so that it can be entered into the record. So I'll be highlighting, as as Lori so ably stated, some key aspects of the supplemental resolutions, and I'm going to try not to repeat too much of this. So again, you're looking at a 2019-2 sales tax supplemental bond resolution and a 2019-3 PIT bond resolution, supplemental resolution, which I'll refer to collectively as the 2019 bonds, since the programs have such really almost identical mechanics. As Lori mentioned, these supplemental resolutions are designed to give the authority maximum flexibility in terms of market conditions and timing of issuances of other authorized state-supported debt. So the sales tax supplemental bond resolution provides that the principal amount of sales tax bonds authorized shall be automatically reduced by the principal amount of 2019-3 PIT bonds issued under that PIT bond supplemental resolution. And so each of those programs will work in tandem so that we don't have an aggregate principal amount in excess of $3.5 billion. And so although it is anticipated that the 2019 bonds will be issued as fixed rate bonds, all or a portion of the 2019 bonds may be issued as variable rate capital appreciation or deferred income bonds. The bonds may be sold at a private sale on a negotiated basis or through competitive bidding, and may be consolidated into a single series of other bonds, or the other 2019 bonds. The supplemental resolutions delegate to various officers of the authority the power to determine the terms of the bonds, including but not limited to the following: the series and subseries of the 2019 bonds, the principal amount of the 2019 bonds, provided that the aggregate principal amount issued under both supplemental resolutions, again, does not exceed that authorized $3.5 billion, the principal amount that will be issued as tax exempt versus taxable, if any, which Matt ably discussed, the date or dates on which the bonds will mature, provided that no 2019 bonds will mature more than 30 years from its date of issuance, and provided further with respect to any 2019 bonds issued to refund any refunded bonds, that the final maturity of such bonds shall not exceed the fiscal year of the final maturity of such refunded bonds considered in the aggregate. Whether the bonds will bear interest at fixed or variable rates, and the rate of rates at which the bonds will bear interest, provided that the true interest cost of any 2019 bonds issued as fixed rate bonds and the initial interest rate of any 2019 bonds issued as variable rate bonds may not exceed 7.5% if issued as tax exempt, or 10% if issued as taxable. Whether the bonds are sold at a public or private sale on a negotiated basis or through competitive bidding, underwriter or underwriters for the 2019 bonds if they're sold on a negotiated basis, the purchase price to be paid by the underwriters of the 2019 bonds if they're sold on a negotiated basis, provided that it is not less than 90% of the principal amount of the 2019 bonds issued, the manner in which the winning bid or bids will be selected if the bonds are awarded on a competitive basis, the redemption provisions of the 2019 bonds, including the redemption dates and prices, subject to certain conditions outlined in the supplemental resolutions, the series and maturities of the refunded bonds to be refunded and the principal amount to be refunded with the proceeds of the 2019 bonds, whether any of the bonds will be book entry bonds and the depository for them. And the supplemental resolutions also authorize various officers of the authority to prepare, execute, and deliver all documents necessary, convenient, or desirable in connection with the sale and issuance of the bonds and the refunding of the refunded bonds, including but not limited to the preliminary official statements, final official statements, the notices of sale, bond purchase agreements, any agreements to provide continuing secondary market disclosure and ensure that underwriters can comply with SEC Rule 15C212. Thank you.
Robert, thank you. Are there questions? Matt or Lori or Robert? I guess Portia, for the record, or Matt for the record, this is a very large proposed transaction, the largest I think we've seen. It is clear that there are reasons for the size of the transaction, but could it have been done differently? Could we have done it in two tranches rather than one? Is there a reason for the size of the transaction?
With the 1.4 billion approximating the taxable advance refunding, that will be in essence a separate sale in perhaps a separate set of buyers for the taxable bonds as opposed to the tax exempt. And again, $1.4 billion, that's quite a sizable taxable sale.
So I mean, to Matt's point, I mean, we'll do the transaction together, the new money and the refunding. But just in terms of execution, it is a different buyer base. The new money transaction sized at, approximately 1.9 billion is sort of in the area of the kind of authorization that we've received in the past for new money projects. Is, a little bit bigger, but not a lot bigger. It's really so that's fairly consistent in terms of the borrowing that we do through these programs. As Matt had indicated, the addition of the refunding brings the number up, but again, the refunding is being done for savings.
Okay. I have no issue with that. It's a large transaction, and I just wanted to make sure. I'm actually very proud of it, if it is approved by the board. So thank you all very much. You sure there are no questions?
And the programs that are being funded, they're similar to what we previously funded by way of these pit sales tax bonds. There's nothing unique or different about the funding or the sources of
Yes.
the bonds being.
Yes.
If there are no more questions, may I have a motion, please, to approve the transaction? Thank you very much, Adrian. Is there a second? John? Thank you. John Gardner, thank you very much. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. Is there none opposed?
Aye.
Thank you, Beryl. I've forgotten to announce that Beryl Snyder is on the phone for this meeting. She therefore cannot participate as a voting member, but has consented, because she couldn't be here, to go through the meeting on the telephone. Beryl, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to hear what's going on, because it's a very important meeting, so thanks.
We appreciate the fact that you're there. So the motion is carried unanimously, and we will move on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're on to tab 4, another single approval transaction summary for St. Mary's Hospital for Children, with co-bond counsel Jennifer Capasso Mendonca of Block Lords and Robert Drillings of Burger Gray, with Gerard Clauser presenting. Importantly today, Gerard is joined by our two very excellent public finance fellows, Alex Yagin and Maria Carrasco.
Apologize, I understand we got tight quarters here, but we did think that it was important.
And we agree. Before you start, Gerard, Ms. Capasso Mendonca, am I pronouncing your name correct?
It's Mendonça, but I was just telling the folks, Mendonça, yeah, it's Portuguese. My husband says Mendonca though, so it's fine.
So
The rest of his family says Mendonça.
we didn't get the spelling incorrect. The spelling is correct. It's
That's
pronounced
correct,
correctly.
yeah.
Forgive me for not asking that question before the meeting.
Fine.
One of the significant initiatives that Gerard Bushell brought to the Dormitory Authority was his fellowship program. Alex and Maria are the fellows in our department, and for the first 6 months of their fellowship, they sort of go through the process here and sort of try to learn, this side of the business, and for the second 6 months, they will go to an underwriter and learn the underwriter side. So we're trying to expose them to sort of the full gambit of what goes on and dealing with the board of directors, and we think that it will help them develop them now as well as when they're on the other side of the table. So we're welcoming them to the table this morning. They contributed to the transaction. They participated in the calls, the working group calls and so forth. They contributed to the staff summary as well. So Maria and Alex.
Thank you, Gerard. Thank you very much.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, DASNY staff and guests, the single approval transaction summary for the St. Mary's Hospital for Children provided to members is seeking authorization for one or more series of 22-year fixed and or variable rate taxable or tax exempt bonds, series 2019 bonds, in an amount not to exceed $77 million. The bonds will be privately placed through the Manufacturers and Traders Trust Company with a 15-year hold period. Bonds will amortize with level monthly principal and interest payments over a period of 22 years. There's financial advisor involved in the transaction, that is Ponder & Company. As mentioned, the direct placement bank is Manufacturers and Traders Trust Company. Purpose of the financing you're considering today is the refunding of the 2010 privately placed bonds, which at that time was the first private placement transaction here at DASNY. St. Mary's will experience net present value savings of $29.7 million, or 38.3% on the refunded bonds. St. Mary's has secured a rate lock of 2.47% with Manufacturers and Traders Trust Company. The prior interest rate with Oppenheimer, which we're refunding, was a rate of 7.875%. Security package includes first lien on mortgage in the hospital campus, gross receipts pledge, an all assets pledge, and a gross receipts pledge of the guarantor. The hospital has had a significant restructuring, which included the resolution of managed care rates. This is a primarily Medicaid payer in excess of 96% Medicaid. They've also improved the admissions process, and their occupancy rates have increased. Additionally, there have been significant program improvements at the hospital. With their medical daycare program, their early education program, and their outpatient programs. I just want to remind the group that this is a pediatric nursing home, so a little bit different than the traditional. The hospital has also had an increase of 6 beds in 2017 and 21 beds in 2019, bringing the total beds to 124. The hospital will also receive the benefit of the Department of Health Shared Savings Program, which allows residential nursing home facilities to share in the savings associated with approved financing. St. Mary's finances have been profitable for the last 4 years, from 2015 to 2018. The operating margin has averaged 0.97% for the last 5 years. The medians for operating margins are often negative for nursing homes. This one is positive. A critical component of St. Mary's is the reimbursement that they receive from Medicaid, and the fact that pediatric nursing homes have historically been exempt from cuts in reimbursement. This is especially noteworthy considering their payer mix and their high dependency on Medicaid reimbursement. The bonds will not carry a rating and are not expected to be reoffered in the secondary market. We've secured the governor's approval for the TEFRA on October 9th, 2019, and the seeker was completed on the 15th. We believe St. Mary's Hospital for Children is a success story on many fronts. We recommend that the board adopt the necessary documents for one series of bonds with maturities not to exceed 22 years, an amount not to exceed $77 million.
Thank you, Gerard. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, before you for consideration are 2 resolutions. The authority's St. Mary's Hospital for Children Revenue Bond Resolution authorizing the issuance of one or more series of bonds to finance or refinance facilities for St. Mary's Hospital for Children. And a series resolution authorizing the issuance of up to $77 million of the authority's St. Mary's Hospital for Children Revenue Bond Series 2019. As Gerard mentioned, the institution is a not-for-profit corporation that operates a 124-bed skilled nursing facility in Queens, providing inpatient care, educational services, home health care, and medical daycare services to children requiring specialized medical care and rehabilitation. The proceeds of the bonds are expected to be used to refinance the authority's outstanding St. Mary's Hospital for Children Revenue Bond Series 2010 and to pay costs of issuance. It's anticipated at this time that the bonds will be issued pursuant to a private placement to Manufacturers and Traders Trust Company, who I'll refer to as the purchaser. The Series 2019 bonds are expected to be issued at a fixed rate, which has been locked, for a period of approximately 15 years, at which time the purchaser will be able to tender the bonds. Ponder & Company is serving as the financial advisor to the institution for this transaction. And I'll let Robert present on the resolutions.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, the general resolution is a new resolution, and the Series 2019 bonds will be the first bonds to be issued under it. The general resolution provides for the issuance from time to time of multiple series of bonds in unlimited principal amounts, except as otherwise provided, as otherwise may be provided in a series resolution. Each series of bonds to be issued under the general resolution will be separately secured from each other series of bonds. The Series 2019 bonds are special obligations of the authority, payable only, of course, out of the applicable revenues, which consist largely of the payments made by the institution under the loan agreement with the institution and the authority. The payment of the Series 2019 bonds is secured by a pledge and assignment made by the general resolution of the applicable revenues, the authority's right to receive those revenues, the authority's security interest in the pledged revenues, subject, of course, to any prior pledges, if any, and monies and investments held in the funds and accounts established under the general resolution and the Series 2019 resolution, other than the arbitrage rebate account and any funder account that may be funded for the payment of purchase price or the early redemption of bonds being called. The Series 2019 resolution delegates to specified authorized officers of the authority the power to determine a number of things, including the principal amount of the bonds to be issued, subject to a cap of $77 million, the date or dates on which the Series 2019 bonds will mature, provided that no Series 2019 bond may mature later than 22 years after the date of issuance, the rate or rates, and any rate-setting mechanics relating thereto, at which the Series 2019 bonds will bear interest, provided that the true interest cost or initial interest rate of tax-exempt bonds cannot exceed 7.5%, and taxable bonds cannot exceed 10%. The purchase price to be paid by the private purchaser, M&T Bank, of the bonds is also to be established, and that cannot be less than 95% of the principal amount of the bonds to be issued. Authorized officers are also delegated the power to set dates for redemption and redemption prices of the 2019 bonds, to determine whether parity indebtedness will be permitted, whether or not the Series 2019 bonds will be book entry bonds, and if so, which depository will be the depository for, whether the Series 2019 bonds will be issued in one or more subseries at one or more times, and the number of subseries, principal amount, designations of each subseries. Although, as Jen said, it is currently anticipated that the Series 2019 bonds will be fixed-rate bonds for a period of 15 years. The Series 2019 resolution doesn't limit the discretion of the authorized officers to determine to issue the Series 2019 bonds in a different configuration than from that which is presently contemplated. In accordance with the authority's financing guidelines for independent institutions, the Series 2019 resolution restricts ownership of the Series 2019 bonds to qualified institutional buyers, referred to as QIBs, which is a defined term under Rule 144A of the Securities Act of 33. Big boys are the limited owners, basically. The Series 2019 resolution also includes delegation to the authorized officers of the authority to execute the loan agreement between the institution and the authority, a bond purchase agreement in connection with the sale of the Series 2019 bonds, a pledge and security agreement between the institution and the authority, which will provide for the pledge of all assets of the institution, referred to therein as pledged collateral, as additional security to the bonds. Power to execute an intercreditor agreement and an account control agreement, if any, and further to execute and or approve any other agreements that may be necessary to effectuate and to do all things necessary or convenient in connection with the sale and issuance of the Series 2019 bonds.
The authority and the institution will also execute a loan agreement in connection with the issuance of the bonds, which will require the institution to make payments in amounts and at times sufficient to make the timely payment of principal and interest on the bonds. The institution's obligation to make payments under the loan agreement will be a general obligation of the institution. It's complete and unconditional, and the amount, manner, and time of making such payments will not be decreased, abated, postponed, or delayed for any cause or reason, or by reason of the happening or non-happening of any event, irrespective of any defense or of any set-off, recoupment, or counterclaim that the institution might otherwise have against the authority, the trustee, the purchaser, for any cause whatsoever. As Gerard mentioned, the loan agreement will be secured by a pledge of gross receipts of the institution, and the document's called Pledged Revenues. And it may permit the institution to incur additional indebtedness that's secured by a parity lien on those pledged revenues under certain circumstances, if acceptable to the purchaser. In addition to the gross receipts pledged, the purchaser is also requiring the following additional security for the institution's obligations under the loan agreement: an all assets pledge of the institution, a mortgage on the institution's main facilities, and a pledge of gross receipts of certain affiliated entities, which we're calling the guarantors. The mortgage, the security interest and lien on the gross receipts and all assets, and the lien on the guarantor's gross receipts will all be granted on a parity with certain existing liens that are currently securing outstanding indebtedness between the hospital and the purchaser. It is expected that the authority's rights under the loan agreement, the security agreement, and the mortgage, subject to certain exceptions, will be assigned to the trustee, who will exercise remedies under the loan agreement, the security agreement, and the mortgage at the direction of the purchaser. In addition, the transaction documents may also contain certain financial covenants that are required by the purchaser. Further, the institution's obligations to make payments under the loan agreement and any other financial obligations of the institution under the loan agreement are being jointly and severally guaranteed pursuant to a guarantee agreement from the guarantors to the trustee for the benefit of the purchaser. The bonds are proposed to be sold pursuant to a bond purchase agreement, which will be among the authority, the institution, and the purchaser. If anyone has any questions, we're happy to answer those.
Are there questions? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the transaction? Gerard, thank you. Is there a second? Johnson, thank you very much. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. There are none opposed. The motion carries unanimously. I suppose we should have awaited John Gardner's return to take the vote. Do we have? Yes. Okay, so we have a proper quorum. Good. Then the transaction is approved. Alex and Maria, thank you both very much for your work on this. Thank you for joining us at the table. Jennifer, Robert, thank you very much for being here today. Gerard, thank you. This was
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
well done. Thanks very much. Behind tab 5 is a proposed transaction for the SUNY dormitory facilities. Co-counsel Virginia Long and Nicholas Peabody, and Doug Stephen, seeking assistance. Steve Posey, present.
Pardon me.
Thank you.
Good morning.
The board is being asked to adopt the necessary documents to authorize multiple series of taxable bonds issued under the University of New York Dormitory Facilities Revenue Bond Program. The bonds will be sold on a negotiated basis with a term not to exceed 30 years, an amount not to exceed $950 million. Bond proceeds will be used to finance various dormitory capital projects at SUNY campuses throughout the state. Current expectation is that approximately $164 million in money bond proceeds from the proposed issuance will be used to fund these projects, although SUNY has approved up to $175 million in money issuance. Bond proceeds will also be used to refund all or a portion of various DASNY bonds, including bonds issued under the old State University Dormitory Facilities Lease Revenue Bond Program and the new SUNY Dorm Program. Funding candidates under the old SUNY Dorm program include the Series 2010A, Series 2011A, and Series 2012A bonds. Refunding candidates under the new SUNY Dorm program include Series 2013A, Series 2015A, and Series 2015B bonds. The refundings are expected to be issued on a taxable basis, or in the case of the Series 2010A bonds, may be issued on a tax-exempt basis before delivery if it's economically advantageous. The refundings may generate net present value savings of approximately $96.2 million, or approximately 14.2% of the bonds being refunded. The final terms of the refunding bonds will not exceed the terms of the bonds being refunded. The SUNY Residence Hall program operates on 25 campuses and serves over 70,000 students on an annual basis. The Residence Hall program is a completely self-supporting program of SUNY, generating sufficient revenues to support its operations, annual maintenance, and debt service. In March 2013, the state enacted legislation authorizing the new SUNY dorm program, which is supported solely by the rents, fees, and charges of the dorm rentals. Pursuant to this enabling act, SUNY executed an assignment to DASNY of all rights in dormitory facilities revenues. SUNY is required to immediately deliver such revenues without appropriation to the Commissioner of Taxation and Finance for deposit into the dormitory facilities revenue fund. Monies are first used to pay debt service on the old SUNY dorm bonds and then debt service on bonds issued under the new SUNY dorms program. Any amounts remaining in the fund after these payments is the absolute property of SUNY to fund operations and maintenance of dormitory facilities. Security for bonds includes a second lien on dormitory rentals deposited into the dormitory facilities revenue fund. Bonds currently outstanding under the old SUNY dorm facilities program have the first lien on these revenues. And this will be the sixth financing under the new SUNY dorm program.
Thanks, Steve. Good morning, Chairman Carney, members of the board. Before you for your consideration are 3 series resolutions authorizing the issuance of bonds under DASNY State University Dormitory Facilities Revenue Bond Resolution adopted on May 15, 2013. Each series resolution authorizes the issuance of up to $950 million of authorized bonds. Those bonds can be issued as fixed rate bonds or variable rate bonds, tax exempt or taxable bonds. The series resolution restricts the aggregate principal amount of authorized bonds that can be issued in total under all 3 series resolutions to $950 million. The series resolutions are designated 2019A, 2019B, and 2020A. Authorized bonds issued pursuant to the 2020A resolution may be issued as forward delivery bonds to effectuate a current refunding in calendar year 2020. The series resolutions delegate to various officers of DASNY the power to make determinations as described in our letter and to do all things necessary or convenient in connection with the sale or issuance of these bonds. This includes, among other things, determinations as to the procurement of credit support or the funding of a debt service reserve fund. No debt service reserve fund is expected to be established in connection with the issuance of these bonds. The general resolution constitutes the agreement between DASNY and the holders of the bonds issued under it and contains the basic terms of that agreement. These bonds will be issued under the general resolution and will all be on parity with each other. As Steve said, these bonds are subordinate to the outstanding bonds issued under the prior SUNY resolution. The bonds issued under the general resolution are special obligations of DASNY payable solely out of the Dormitory Facilities Revenue Fund and the monies and investments on deposit in the fund and the accounts within it from time to time. The general resolution permits the issuance of additional bonds only if the dormitory facilities revenues collected during each of the preceding SUNY fiscal years satisfy the test described in our letter, except for refunding bonds, which can be done for savings.
Good morning, all. In connection with the issuance of the bonds under the general resolution, DASNY entered into 2 agreements, the Financing and Development Agreement and the Fund Administration Agreement. The Financing and Development Agreement is signed between SUNY and DASNY, and it sets out the respective obligations of DASNY and SUNY in respect to construction, rehabilitation, renovation, and improvement of the dormitory facilities. It imposes on SUNY certain obligations, among others, to operate, maintain, and repair the dormitory facilities, establish fees and charges that during each of SUNY's fiscal year will be set at least sufficient to pay the debt service on all outstanding bonds under the prior resolution and the general resolution, to fund the reserve for operations and maintenance and the reserve for repair and rehabilitation, the fees and expenses of DASNY, all expenses for the operation and maintenance of the dormitory facilities. The second agreement, the Dormitory Facilities Revenue Fund Administration Agreement, by and among DASNY and SUNY and the State Commissioner of Taxation and Finance, establishes procedural requirements that govern deposits to the transfers and payments from the Dormitory Facilities Revenue Fund. The authorized bonds are are proposed to be sold in one or more negotiated sales to a syndicate of underwriters pursuant to bond purchase agreements containing customary terms and conditions. To enable the underwriters to purchase and offer the authorized bonds consistent with the provisions of Rule 15C212, the series resolutions authorize DASNY to enter into an agreement to provide continuing disclosure. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Are there questions? There being none, may I have a motion please to approve the transaction? Tracy, thank you for the motion. John, thank you for the second. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. Motion carries. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Good to see you. We're going to tab 6 in your board books. The transaction summary is for the Convent of the Sacred Heart of New York, and David Ostrand is going to present it.
Good morning.
Good morning, David.
Board's being asked to adopt a resolution to proceed for one or more series of tax-exempt and/or taxable, fixed and/or variable rate bonds, each in an amount not to exceed $25 million, on behalf of the Convent of the Sacred Heart School of New York. The Convent of Sacred Heart of the School of New York operates a non-residential school for girls for pre-K through grade 12 located on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. This will be the school's second financing through DASNY, the first of which financed a portion of the athletic facility that was constructed back in 2011. Proceeds from this issuance will be used to refund all or a portion of those DASNY of the Convent of the Sacred Heart Series 2011 bonds. This will be a refunding for savings with no extension of the final maturity. The proposed issuance is expected to be sold through a private placement. The school has issued a request for proposals to potential purchasers and expects to select a single purchaser for the proposed issuance by the end of October. So by the time we come back to the board to adopt documents in November, the school will have selected a purchaser. The Series 2011 bonds are first callable on May 1st of 2021, and under federal tax law may only be refunded with tax-exempt bonds beginning 90 days before the call date. So as a result, the school is proposing to move forward with one of two options to lock in fixed rate savings in the current market. The school will select from one of these two options based on the economics of the responses received from the RFP process. The first option is a taxable to tax-exempt transaction where the Series 2019 bonds will be issued as taxable bonds at closing, which is anticipated in November of this year. Once the Series 2011 bonds are callable on or around May 1st of 2021, the Series 2019 taxable bonds will be subject to a mandatory tender and replaced with Series 2021 tax-exempt bonds upon receiving a tax-exempt opinion from bond counsel. The second option is essentially a forward delivery, where the purchaser would commit to a tax-exempt fixed rate in November of this year, but the Series 2021 refunding bonds would not be issued until the Series 2011 bonds are callable on or around May 1st of 2021. And again, at that point, the Series 2021 bonds would bear interest at a predetermined tax-exempt rate upon receiving a tax-exempt opinion from bond counsel. So assuming a conservative taxable rate through final maturity, the refunding of the Series 2011 bonds will result in total net present value savings in the range of $3.3 million or 14.2% of the refunded bonds. Some additional information on the school. The Convent of the Sacred Heart has experienced consistent demand for a limited number of openings. Applications have averaged approximately 500 annually, and for fall of 2018, the school had an acceptance rate of 32%. Enrollment has averaged approximately 723 students over the last 5 years. The school's balance sheet reflects a growing financial resource base over the last 5 years due to a combination of positive operating margins, investment earnings, and fundraising support. And the school's total net assets have increased by 7.8% during that time, from $105.5 million in 2014 to $113.7 million in 2018. Lastly, the school does have an A- rating from S&P, but again, these bonds will be privately placed and there will be no expectation of a rating on these bonds. Mr. Chairman.
David, thank you. I want to say that I thought that the transaction summary was done very well. Very informative piece. Thank you. Are there questions for David? There being none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the transaction? Gerard, thank you. Is there a second? John Gardner, thank you very much. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. As there are none opposed, the motion carries unanimously. David, thank you.
Thank you.
Seven. Is a proposed tax lease program lease. I gather a portion you're going to.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Behind tab 7 is an amended TELF financing on behalf of Montefiore Medical Center in an amount not to exceed $44,870,565. This amendment basically increases the amount of that not to exceed dollar level from the level that we provided to you back in June. If you look at the second sheet, there's a revised equipment list, and you can see there to the far right, there's a column which shows increase and decrease in terms of the dollars associated with the various equipment being financed. So really the purpose of bringing this back before the board is to increase the not to exceed amount to the amount stated in this memo. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Portia. Questions for Portia? Being none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the TELF transaction? Tracy, thank you. Is there a second? Thank you, John. All in favor? All in favor, please indicate with aye. 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 Is there none opposed? The motion carries unanimously. We were to have had a governance committee report today. Because of the length of the agenda, Mr. Johnson, and other reasons, Mr. Johnson has graciously agreed to let us postpone that until the next meeting. No problem. God. We're going to move on to the management reports. The first one will be the report of the Vice President. Alderman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Behind tab 9 is the President's report for the month of October. My report stands as submitted. However, I just would like to highlight one particular item. On October 2nd and 3rd, DASNY participated in the state's MWE conference. We've always been an active participant. There were participants from all divisions within DASNY. And in particular, I just want to note for the record that Michael Clay, our Senior Director of Opportunities Program, received the MWE Champions Award. Michael and I have worked together for many years, and he does a great job, and it was great to see him get both the internal and external accolades that he deserves, and he received that at the Champions Dinner, so I just want to note that for the record. In addition, just operationally, from the transition side of things, we have moved all appropriate operational approvals from Michael Corrigan and Gerard to Caroline and myself. We have rescheduled all operational meetings with staff, so I'm happy to report, best of my knowledge, we have moved into a smooth transition period. We haven't missed anything, and with Michael Corrigan's continued assistance, we've got a continued resource for the transition and institutional knowledge transfer that has been occurring over the last several months and continues. So at this point, things are going well, and we are moving along. So that concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
If there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them.
Are there any questions for Paul? There being none.
Yes.
We have resolution for the members of the board acknowledging with appreciation the service of Gerard P. Bouchard. I like to read portions of these resolutions into the record. I will pick a few of these and read them in resolution. Board members will be given an opportunity to sign this resolution immediately after this meeting, if I'm informed correctly. Whereas Gerard P. Bouchard, PhD, was appointed President and CEO of DASNY by Governor Andrew Cuomo on May 21st, 2015, becoming the first DASNY President and CEO to be confirmed by the New York State Senate. And whereas during his nearly 4.5 years at DASNY, Dr. Bouchard directed a comprehensive redesign of DASNY's corporate structure that streamlined internal processes and created greater efficiencies. And whereas Dr. Bushell expanded DASNY's reach by implementing new service offerings, including hybrid financing and a broadening of DASNY's energy performance contracting business and tax-exempt equipment leasing program. And whereas DASNY led the nation as the #1 bond issuer twice and breaking its financing record by closing fiscal year 2019 with approximately $8.7 billion in bond issues, including completing the largest private client deal in DASNY's history, an $829 million hybrid financing with New York University. And whereas Dr. Bushell successfully integrated DASNY's procurement unit and opportunity programs group to ensure diversity and inclusion, are a centerpiece of DASNY's contracting process, and established a public finance diversity fellowship to promote diversity within the finance industry, and paneled many small businesses, MWBEs, and service-disabled veteran-owned businesses to provide professional services built upon DASNY's shortened bond training program to expand capacity while partnering with minority and majority underwriters and bond counsel firms on numerous financings, hired the first MWBE firm to act as DASNY's broker of record for general liability insurance, and gained statutory authority to establish a pilot program to create targeted, competitive procurement opportunities for small businesses and MWEs. And whereas Dr. Bushell advanced alternative construction delivery methods, such as design build and construction manager build, to expedite infrastructure projects, leading to the successful deployment of design build at SUNY Brockport, where DASNY completed a $22.8 million 263-bed residence hall in just 13 months, and with a 32% MWB participation rate, paving the way for new opportunities such as $750 million life sciences, such as the $750 million life sciences public health laboratory, and a $33.5 million 257-bed residence hall at SUNY Polytechnic Institute. Now, therefore, be it resolved that DASNY's board pauses to reflect and appreciate the tireless dedication, commitment, leadership, vision, integrity, and management skills Dr. Bushell brought to DASNY during his tenure, and be it further resolved that the board offers its sincerest thanks to Dr. Bushell and wishes him great success in his future endeavors. This resolution shall take effect immediately. We did this once before by acclamation. I don't know how that works, so we'll just vote on this one. May I have a motion, please, to approve the resolution? Thank you very much, Gerard. Is there a second, please? Joan, thank you. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. As there are none opposed, the motion carries unanimously. The board has approved the resolution. I think, Portia, this is where, oh, no. Tim, did you want? So, Portia.
No, we just need to move on from portion to board next.
I'm sorry.
The computer had to reboot,
Oh.
so they
So we have to
can't
go to-
pause the recording.
So we have to go to the
So we have to skip the next agenda item and go right to portion.
I see. Thank you very much. I finally got it. Portia, we're going to go directly to you now.
Okay. Studio.
Does that mean it's not recording right now?
It is recording. We just can't pause
We
the
can't
recording.
stop it.
Okay.
So we're going to have to go to the end of the meeting.
I was going to do something very inappropriate.
You can wait till she can pause that.
It pleases me enormously. I hesitated.
Behind tab 10 are the standard public finance reports. There is, I believe, the last piece in the behind tab 10. There's a memo and a resolution in connection with the healthcare facility transformation program statewide 2 part 2. So before the members for your consideration is a memo and resolution authorizing submission of the healthcare facility transformation program statewide 2 part 2 projects, that's a mouthful, to PHCB for approval. The board is not being asked to review each of these projects. The board has undertaken this process of submitting projects to PACB for approval for a number of healthcare capital grant programs in the past. They're listed out in the memo, but they include programs such as HEAL and CRFP and Kings County Transformation, as well as a number of other healthcare programs. It should be noted that the statewide program is established for the purpose of strengthening and protecting continued access to healthcare services in communities throughout the state. So again, we're asking the members for your consideration to authorize the submission of these projects to PACB for their approval. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Portia. Are there questions for Portia? There being none, is it appropriate now that I go through these?
I have just a few other.
Please.
A few. Since the last board meeting.
Hang on, first one. There is a resolution.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
No, I forgot too, actually. The HON tab 10, after the report, Portia just mentioned, there is a resolution. It's a very simple resolution, as I recall it. But I can't seem to find it. There's a schedule here. Here it is. Resolution of members of the Dormitory Authority approving the submission of a statewide Part 2 projects to the Public Authorities Control Board. Do you all have it? It's behind the schedule.
It's before the end, it's about
Yes.
5-6
Yes.
pages before the end.
Thank you.
You want to take a second and go over it? As it appears that a couple of us had not found it previously. Take your time.
No, I read it. I just couldn't find it.
Okay, all right, fine. Are there questions about the resolution itself? Hearing none, may I have a motion please to approve it? Thank you, Tracy. Is there a second? Adrian, thank you very much. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Now, Portia, I'm sorry.
Okay. Thank you very much. Since the last board meeting, we've priced the Cornell and Northwell transactions, which is reflected in my written report. Regarding Northwell, as you know, the Northwell financing contemplated a debt structure with a 12-year deferral of principal with amortization 2031 through 2040. Revised information was provided to us for analysis that resulted in 8 years of additional asset life. As a result, the structure was revised to reflect amortization from 2031 to 2048, so just pushed it out a little bit further. The revised DOH memo is included in your handouts, and we priced the transaction very successfully. We also priced MSK last week. As you'll recall, MSK contemplated pricing certain bonds competitively and doing a certain portion of the bonds through a negotiated sale. I have to say the combined sale was a very, very big success. The combination of the two methods of sale really worked very, very well for MSK. They got a tremendous result in terms of their pricing. Incredibly tight spreads worked really well for them. Just a very brief market update. New issue supply is currently about $298 billion year to date. That's about 11.6% higher than supply levels seen at this time last year. Total supply for this week is extremely heavy at about $12.8 billion, notwithstanding the fact that it's a short week given the holiday. U.S. Treasury's movement is the news of U.S. and China reaching a partial trade agreement. And top-rated municipals were also weaker across the curve, the 10-year and 30-year MMD up 8 basis points from the previous day. Municipal bond funds continue to report inflows. This will now be the 40th consecutive week of inflows into the funds. Rates are continue to be very low. 1 and 10 and 30-year MMD have increased 2, 5, and 4 basis points since the September meeting. But having said that, I mean, rates really do continue to be incredibly low. I mean, that's part of the reason why we are seeing the financings that we're seeing on the refunding side. It's a tremendous amount of refunding activity, and folks are feeling like, you know, taxable advance refundings are also really very economical in terms of the savings that are being achieved. The quarterly financial advisor report is included in the board book. There is a single approval pipeline report that was also included in the board book. I will note that in the handouts for the members is a revised single approval pipeline report that reflects Doug Seaton as MWPD co-counsel for the Barnard transaction. And on the One DASNY front, we continue our One DASNY implementation efforts. We'll continue to keep you posted as we meet with clients and our financing partners. And the last thing I wanted to mention to the board is that much to my own, personal sadness here, both Larry and Andy are retiring. Today is Andy's last day. Larry will be retiring at the end of the month, both, as you all know, critical members of my team and really critical members of the DASNY staff, and I will miss him dearly.
And much admired. Much admired. I've got a few things I'll read here. If they will embarrass you, both of you. That is my intent. but I believe it's really worth doing. Take a few minutes. I really want to do this. I want to embarrass you. For Larry's, the few words I have for Larry, I'm going to pass out some photographs. Go back, pass them that way. Go back a good ways. Andy, they tried to do this to you, but you were successful in hiding the pictures. Such a good day.
That's great.
Guess who, which one is Larry? In all seriousness, Larry has a unique background, which made him perfect for his role at DASNY as Senior Director of Portfolio Management. He has a BS in Chemical Engineering from Clarkson College, a JD from the Albany Law School, and an MBA from RPI. He has more than 25 years of public service, which also made him perfect for his role, including counsel to the New York State Housing Finance Agency, New York State Medicare Facilities Financing Agency, I won't read the years, Larry, and Director of Product Development and Marketing at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. That was from 89 to 91. This is Larry's second tour at DASNY. He has fostered a strong relationship between the Department of Health and DASNY, as has been demonstrated around this table any number of times, in dealing with the complexities of the hospital industry. Larry's knowledge of the healthcare and higher ed sectors is exceptional, and I couldn't agree more with that. He knows the largest trends and the smallest details, and yes, he does. Larry has provided key oversight of distressed hospitals, which has tested his financial, legal, and business prowess when dealing with covenant issues, management consultants, and debtor in possession financings. Larry has worked on all of the high-profile healthcare issues involving DASNY, One Brooklyn Health System, and Health Facility Restructuring Pool, which is known around these parts as HFRP, because everything must have an acronym, or at least initials. Healthcare Efficiency and Affordability Law, and Capital Restructuring Financing Program grant awards. It goes without saying, Larry, that you're going to be greatly missed, and I'd like to stand up and say thank you. Andy Purcell. I wish we had pictures. I know there are. Andy has more than 30 years of service with DASNY. He came to DASNY from Pete Mark after receiving a degree in accounting from Lycoming College in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. Larry's worked his way up at DASNY, and in his own quiet way has been one of DASNY's most influential staff members. His first position at DASNY was as a senior accountant in 1989. He is leaving us as a director of public finance. Andy has seen a lot of changes at DASNY. He's also been responsible for a lot of changes at DASNY and has been at the center of advocating for our clients through these changes. Andy helped to guide many healthcare clients through the process after DASNY and MCFA merged in 1995. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Andy helped explain the new obligated group structure to the board. He's explained it to me on several occasions. A leading proponent of one DASNY, Andy was instrumental in the successful implementation of numerous process improvements and applied many of these improvements to recent transactions such as the Montefiore Health System's hybrid tax-exempt taxable financing and the Catholic Health System of Western New York's financing. Throughout Andy's tenure with DASNY, he has worked on over 230 financings worth more than $46.5 billion. Again, Andy, you will be greatly, greatly missed. And again, I'd like to stand up and congratulate you on the job well done. Going on to
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
you can go in. You're sure?
Yes. They never come out.
And we're going to go into executive session, Steve, before your report. May I have a motion to go into executive session to discuss the financial and credit history of particular corporations, proposed pending or current litigation, and the employment history of particular persons or matters leading to the appointment, employment, promotion, demotion, discipline, dismissal, or removal of particular persons. John Gardner, thank you for the motion. Is there a second? Jones, thank you. All in favor? Aye. We're in executive session. And we'll record. Jonathan. We've just left the closed session during which no decisions were made other than to return to a public session. We're going to go to the general counsel report first.
Thank you. I only have one item and I'll be very brief. As I reported last month, I would be coming this month with a resolution of clarification to the procured counsel panel to allow D. Seaton and Associates to also work with the law firm of Nixon Peabody. D. Seaton and Associates came in as a joint venture only with Squire Patton Boggs. The two partners at Squire Patton that we deal with the most have moved to Nixon. That would be Jeffrey Cole and Chris Wrightsell. And the question came up on whether Nixon could also use D. Seaton and Associates. And it's a very, very interesting question because they're not on our emerging firm because they do not consider themselves to be an emerging firm. So Nixon, when I looked at their procurement, did not come in with anyone that they would work with. They said correctly that they would work with any MWB firm, all takers, and they'd be willing to work with anyone. And they've done a very good job of reaching out and establishing relationships with two other firms over the years. And so I could think of no reason why they couldn't subcontract with D. Seaton and Associates. But for my internal purposes, I'd like to be clear on my schedule that they can do this. So I've prepared this resolution. It's a short resolution, and it's without prejudice to any relationships that Nixon has with other MWBE firms. And to answer one question that might come up, if Squire Patton Boggs were to come in tomorrow on a financing, they could also continue to work with D. Seaton and Associates. That's my summary. I'd ask that the resolution pass. Thank you.
Are there questions from Mike about this resolution? There being none, may I have a motion please to approve? Thank you, John Gardner. Is there a second? John Johnson, thank you very much. All those in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. Is there none opposed? It passes unanimously. Michael, thank you. Steve, I hope you'll accept my apology for taking so long to get to your report. But it's your turn.
No apology required. All right, behind, I forgot which tab I was on. Behind tab 11 are the three standard construction division monthly reports. On the cover of the construction projects report are photos of the recently completed Whiteface Hall renovation project at Cindy Plattsburgh, The scope of the full gut renovation of the 9-story, 390-bed residence hall, as well as site improvements and a upgrade to SUNY Plattsburgh's housing and residence life offices. Kitchens were added on each floor and lounge space as well. The budget was $19 million. Design started in November of 16 and completed in September of 17. JMZ were the architects. Construction started in May of 18, completed this past August. Murnane Building Contractors was the GC. I've got some additional photos I'll send around. On page 3 of the report, there are 4 new projects noted that total $29.3 million. On page 11 of the report, construction expenditures update, the delta between last year and this year through August is in the negative. I was at South Beach yesterday, South Beach Lake Center. Our general contractor has missed the October 4th substantial completion date. We are now projecting a mid-November substantial completion date. Manpower remains high between 350 and 400 daily and between 150 and 200 on the weekends. Life safety systems installation and finished work and site work are ongoing. Regarding FIT, 75% documents were received on September 13th. The design review was completed on October 7th. We received cost estimates on October 4th. The cost estimates from both estimators were over the project budget, but we're still reviewing the estimates today. 100% construction docs are due in November, and we're going to bid the project in early 2020. I'm going to move to some other items. PLA negotiations. We had a September 19th negotiation session with the New York City BCTC. There's been some data request exchanges, and we did execute a letter agreement to extend the current PLA through December of 2019. We feel we'll have an agreement by that time. That concludes my report.
Are there questions for Steve? Because I have a comment, actually. First of all, I think the picture on the front of your report it's beautiful. I mean, different pictures, of course. The combination of them is just beautiful. But I thought maybe the next time you're in Plattsburgh, you might want to stop by and talk to somebody. Tell them that linguistically, if you look at the center picture, they have explored, dream, and discover. Well, that's not really how that happens. You dream, then you explore, then you discover.
I'll let the architect know.
That's great.
This is what I do.
I love it.
I love the weeds. Thank you very much, Steve. Good report. Kimberly, often you stand on your report, but you don't have to this time.
Oh, I will.
Kim, thank you. And thank you for all the work that you put in preparation for this meeting today.
And we're sorry we're giving you a lot more.
It was well received. Your work was well received. Thank you. Is there, two things. Joe, I know you're leaving, your last meeting with us. I know Brian is going to come in. I want to thank you for your service to this board.
Thank you.
Thank you. You've been very diligent and participatory, and we are all very grateful. Thank you very much. Is there any other business to come before this board?
Sorry, we can put this off. But the agenda for the proposed contract policy and guidelines, can we discuss that next time?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Great.
And of course, there is an NGHP meeting tab at the end of your book, consistent with the governance committee postponement. We are postponing that discussion as well. Now, may I have a motion, please, to adjourn? Joan, thank you so much. Is there a second? We are adjourned. Go ahead.
expenses. And so that's perfect example of how to sequence.
They're
starting to get.
Lobbing all those
That's
expenses.
funny.
Employers do that to you.
Well, you could argue, you could argue.